Hello and welcome everyone today to episode 29 of the new MDs, mothers, doctors, and scientists. And this is going to be one of my favorite. I've had lots of favorites, but one of my favorite episodes because we are not only honoring mothers, doctors, and scientists, some of my favorite, most amazing women in the world, but a Mother's Day tribute. Yes, I know Mother's Day passed. We are still honoring women. It should be every day in my book. You all know me. I'm Dr. Michelle Perro. GMOscience.org hosts this show. And here you can see a copy of my book. My second one will be out, if all things go well, in the fall. But let's get into why we're here today. The focus of today's show is to get into the weeds, literally, beyond the traditional medical box, the usual paradigm of pediatrics, and introduce to you women behind the scenes have been doing integrative medicine for decades. I know because I know all these gals, both personally and professionally. And so without further ado, rather than me reading their bios, which are really pretty impressive, I'm going to have each of them just briefly introduce who they are to you, and then we'll get into some stories. So, Elizabeth, Liz, you're the first in my Hollywood Squares. Please tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, I am a board-certified pediatrician, and I got very intrigued by the neurodevelopmental explosion of cases in the mid to late 90s. And so I embarked on this journey to try to take care of the kids that were falling through the cracks. And along the way, I got to be medical director of the Autism Research Institute, and I'm very involved in programs to educate clinicians. I think of myself primarily as a medical educator. I love taking care of kids. I like taking care of the complex kids. I find that so rewarding. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. And we shared that because I too jumped into this mix. It was autism spectrum disorder and neurodevelopmental that got me rolling as well. Nikki and Nicole, pardon, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Hi, thank you for having me today, Michelle. I'm also a board-certified pediatrician, integrative medicine doctor. I've been practicing for 25 years, and I spent the first 10 years in my practice world becoming frustrated with conventional medicine and just seeing how the children were becoming sick, and started studying integrative medicine at that point. And I have a practice in Northern California. It's called Ollie Health, and we work with all things integrative medicine for our children in the area.
Thank you, Nicole. And Nicole and I have done some talks together out in her neck of the woods where it's really beautiful. I appreciate that you being here. Next in my squares, Stacia Kennett. You and I have a lot of history together. Stacia, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thanks, Michelle. I've been a pediatrician since 1992. When I came out of residency, I started working in Marin County where the children were healthy, and I realized that I had been trained to take care of sick children, and now I had to take care of well children. And I realized my job was to keep children healthy. And so in 1998, I started a practice in Marin County called Pediatric Alternatives, and I've been practicing integrative medicine ever since then. Mostly had to train myself because at that time nobody was doing integrative medicine for kids. Maybe a couple people, but there weren't many of us. And so practice is still going. I guess that's 27 years now. So great to be here.
And Stacia and I shared a little journey together at Oakland Children's Hospital, urgent care later. And I actually worked in her pediatric alternatives office for a bit doing acutes during COVID. Oh, that was so fun, Stacia. We could talk about that later. And last but not least, my dear friend and colleague, Elisa Song. Tell us about yourself, Elisa.
So I'm a pediatrician here in the San Francisco Bay Area with Stacia and Michelle, and Nikki's not too far off, right? Let's see, I have a brick and mortar practice, whole family wellness that I started back in 2004 as an integrative functional medicine practice, and honored to be doing this for a while. When I first started, I remember meeting Liz at one of the first DAN conferences I went to. It was called Defeat Autism Now. No longer called that because it stands for the Divers Alert Network. But that's how I met Liz, is really one of the thought leaders in this biomedical approach, really functional medicine approach to kids on the spectrum. And as I was starting my practice, really thinking about how to organize and run a practice, I actually went up and shadowed Stacia and Lindy, and really, got a taste for what possibilities were in this space. And then along the way, of course, met Michelle and Nikki, and just really, I feel blessed to have such amazing colleagues. And at this point now, apart from the brick and mortar, I have an online educational platform called Healthy Kids, Happy Kids, and I'm trying to do a lot more to educate parents and practitioners. And through the A4M Pediatric Symposium, which A4M now is dedicated to really bringing pediatric integrative medicine out to practitioners. So just grateful to be a part of all of this and all of you guys, and being on this journey together.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And it was Elisa who got me started in some very specific parts of homeopathy. I'm also a homeopath. And I had my first talk on homotoxicology, also known as German biologic medicine. It was Elisa's talk, and it kind of flipped my world. And I've been practicing that ever since. Thank you, Dr. Song. So you can see the breadth and experience of these gals in front of you, to our attendees. And it's pretty amazing. And I want to start now getting into what we don't need to be on soliloquies. This is not a Shakespearean monologue, but a conversation between us regarding our journey. We're all moms, we're all doctors, we're all scientists, because if we don't show the science, we get skewered. And some of the joys, and maybe we could even touch upon some of the challenges that we face. I'm sure there've been a few bumps in the road. I can think of about 7,000 or so, a few bumps. And let's just start. Maybe we can begin talking about that, what it's been like for us to get here today. So would anyone like to start, or I can assign people? I'm a bit bossy. You tell me.
Why don't you assign, Michelle, so that we can...
I'm going to assign Liz. You're right next to me on my screen. So Liz, why don't you start and let's get the ball rolling? I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so in the beginning of my career, I was doing traditional pediatrics in a group practice, and hated the feeling of trying to back out of the room to get to the next patient because time was so short. So I ended up teaching pediatrics in a family medicine residency, which I absolutely love because I do love to teach. But in the late 90s, I started seeing this huge explosion of neurodevelopmental problems. And one of my patients, who seemed perfectly fine to me at his 15-month checkup, regressed into autism. So I had this moment where I felt like somebody needed to do something. And I ended up leaving the residency and starting a solo practice, which is honestly a very challenging thing to do. Because in pediatrics, I feel like we need to be available to our patients. So it was hard to be on call for like 20 years, except when I was out of the country lecturing. That's one reason I love to lecture out of the United States, is I get to get away from what was my beeper at that time. But it's led me to the most amazing colleagues. I mean, I am so grateful that I practice the kind of medicine I've been doing. It's challenging, it's complicated, but it's so rewarding when the kids get so much better. And I like it so much more than the in and out of the room with 5 patients an hour brand of doing pediatrics. And so that's in a nutshell where I'm coming from now. I really want to develop other clinicians, and it doesn't just have to be pediatricians. It can be family docs, it can be nurse practitioners, but the kids need our help and they're complicated. So I think that they're not going to be well served in traditional pediatric practices if they have complex chronic illness.
Yeah, let's, right here, maybe this would be a plug for Secretary Kennedy to get rid of the 5 an hour system. That insurance model with the middleman doesn't work. By the time you take the history, the patient's out of the room. By the time you get the kid undressed, your 15-minute or 10-minute slot is over. So thank you, Liz. And we're going to get a little bit more into, perhaps we can even talk about that autism switch that I saw, where in California we're bathed in autism, right? We saw the last stats, 1 in 12.5 boys, right? How exciting for our great state. 4 out of 5 of us right here are from California. Nikki, I keep saying Nikki because that's
okay.
all
Yeah,
you, Nicole.
that's
Nicole,
okay.
let's go on to you. Tell us a little bit about your journey, the ups and downs.
Yeah, I graduated in 2000 and finished residency in 2003. And I remember still just being so excited about what I was going to do with this training and how good I felt about doing something that I believed was going to bring good to the world of children. And I slowly had my eyes opened over the next several years that I really didn't have the training that prepared me to understand what was happening with the patients. And I think I had this interesting timing because when I was in medical school, I never really even learned about autism. Like it wasn't something that we talked about. It was a really rare thing. I knew what it was, but it wasn't like I actually saw patients with it. And then once I was out of residency, as similar, we started seeing a lot of cases and I had no idea what was causing it, where it was coming from. I felt very underprepared, and so that drove me to really listen to my moms in my practice. The mothers in my practice are what educated me at first, and I think that was. I'm very grateful for that. I mean, that continues to happen every day. I learn something new. But after a few years of that, I started to separate more and more from my belief in my training. And then my husband became sick with multiple sclerosis. And at that point, we were young. I think we were in our 30s. And that was my moment of really waking up to what I understood in conventional medicine's approach to a chronic disease. And we went to UCSF, and it's an incredible center for MS. But really quickly chose to leave that environment and go into functional integrative medicine. And so I pretty much dove in to studying as fast and as quickly as I could because my feet were against the fire. And it was great because at that point, we healed his MS. I'm happy to say that his repeat MRIs, all the lesions resolved. We treated the autoimmunity in the brain. And then I had this kind of like education and awareness of what was driving that I knew, I needed to bring into my practice with my patients. And so that's kind of how I got started. And then I think just really starting first with functional medicine and becoming certified in functional medicine. And then really energetic medicine. And, you just keep gaining more and more skills. But it was also a very independent learning experience because there really wasn't, when I was doing this, structured training for pediatricians. I mean, everywhere that I went, it was an adult medicine type of focus. And then just adapting it to the kids, which has worked well. But I'm excited about, what Liz is talking about and bringing this in. And it is much more now than it was for bringing training to our pediatricians to make this feel doable.
So, Nicole, thank you for sharing that. And what I'm hearing is some things are going to be echoed in all our stories is listening to moms, being curious and recognizing the system did not prepare us to deal with the onslaught of chronic diseases in children, which continues to tick up. And also personal story that we've had someone in our own families that were affected and we had to dig deep. Certainly touches me. And I've met so many integrative practitioners who had that experience. They themselves or their child or spouse, in your case, got touched and we pivoted. But it's this curiosity and willingness to pivot that is what I think separates a lot of us just from our colleagues. Let's move on to you, Elisa. You're my next to my next side. Tell us.
Well, I guess part of my story is a little different in that, I mean, knock on wood, I did not have a family member who didn't have health answers that propelled me into this. When I was an undergrad here at Stanford, I mean, just down the street, this was in I graduated in 1992. And I remember, I was all set to be a civil rights children's advocate, go to law school. I was a public policy major and, it was this interesting. I always wanted to, advocate for kids. And I realized at one point, well, if I'm on Capitol Hill, I might be doing good for kids, but I'm not going to be working with kids. So I really had this moment of what am I going to be doing? And, it's in those moments of, you know, where you're at a fork in the road, where if you pay attention, the right teacher often comes along, right? You get the message that you need at the time. And so I remember I was walking on campus and saw this flyer, which back then, this is, mind you, this was like 1989, 1990. It was a flyer for the American Holistic Medical Association, which no longer exists, right? But it was, I think, their first or second annual conference. And I was like, what is this holistic medicine? I grew up in a conventional house and my mom was an OBGYN. So I took myself there. I was a junior and I drove myself down to the convention center and my mind was totally blown. I was hearing from folks that were just starting to get known, like Deepak Chopra, Andrew Weil, Joan Borisenko. I remember that afternoon coming home and on the landline calling my mom, saying, "Hey, Mom, I think I want to become a naturopathic doctor." And she was like, "What's that?" Right? She never said don't do it. She never said no. But here's the thing: back then, no one in my circle had ever heard of naturopathy, right? And so a lot of what I got was, well, maybe then you want to go to medical school first, And from what I saw from my mother, being a solo OBGYN, I was like, I don't know that I want to do that, but okay. So when I went to medical school, it was always with this idea of how can we do things in a little bit of a different way. So I remember in medical school, I founded it was like the American Medical Student Association, like alternative medicine section, right? It wasn't even called holistic, it was alternative, right? And then in residency, I created my own elective my second year with the rheumatology department. And I went all around San Francisco and I sat in at chiropractors' offices and acupuncturist offices and nutritionists. And I wrote a primer on a complementary and alternative approach to juvenile arthritis. And I gave it in front of the students and the residents and the attendings. And I mean, nobody ever said looked at me crosswise, but I know my primary care clinic, I was the one that everyone sent the patients who, were those patients, right? Who questioned, who weren't sure about the vaccine schedule. But, it was a different time then. It was so much more, I feel, I don't know, maybe it was a residency program, but I did a morning rounds lecture on, an open-minded vaccine approach to parents, right? And people listened, attentively. There was no booing, no questioning. But I mean, it was so interesting, right? That back then there was a little bit more of an open dialogue, and then here we go. I mean, just things have shifted so much, and I feel like it's become ever increasingly divided. And I guess now for me, I mean, I love working with the parents, and that's why I started the online platform. But I truly, truly believe that there are young physicians and even established physicians who know that there's a different way, who are open-minded, who want to pivot. And I don't want to lump all the physicians in with, oh, you're one of those closed-minded ones. So that's kind of my latest mission, because I always said I'm never going to work with doctors because they have such egos. And I was traumatized early on by people calling me unethical for doing all this alternative stuff. But now as you see more practitioners, some of them who've been practicing for decades, and they're like, oh my God, I wish I knew this sooner, right? I feel like we need to stop giving all physicians a bad rap, because I feel like that's kind of where things have headed towards. And yes, there are some that maybe do deserve that, but I'm very hopeful that things are changing, and that there's going to be, a new set of practicing and young physicians who are seeing the way that medicine can be practiced to really help our kids.
Wow, Lisa, you were, I think, ahead of the gang, in your early exposure to holistic and integrative medicine. I feel like I came from the school of troglodyte medicine back in New York. I wasn't as advanced as you were. I needed to get beat on the head a few times. I mean, the door open, but so thank you for that, Sharon. And we agree. We're trying, and I know, Liz, you're working on this, to bring young minds, young hearts into the integrative space and expand their minds. They're not getting in medical school a year of pharmacology, 2 hours of nutrition, a little bit, unbalanced. So we're trying to bring those changes in literally as we speak. But I'd like to get to you, Stacia. Last but not least, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, I consider myself a primary care pediatrician. I've always liked primary care. I've always loved taking care of babies and young children. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I realized when I finished my residency at Oakland Children's, where I took care of a lot of sick kids, when I got into practice, I was taking care of well children. And I didn't actually have any tools. I was just waiting for them to get sick. So get an ear infection, so I give them antibiotics. They get eczema, give them some steroids. So, and back then, mostly kids weren't as sick as they are now. We didn't have nearly as many kids with chronic illnesses. They didn't have all the food sensitivities. We didn't have, very many kids with autism, and so as I said, I realized, my job was to keep kids healthy. So my pivot was how do I start out kids from the very beginning with healthy habits and routines, and families and parents with healthy habits and routines, so the kids will more likely be healthy. And when they do get sick, they're more likely to recover. And that was also at the time when we were first starting to understand that we were creating problems with the overuse of antibiotics for ear infections. And they were starting to, starting to be literature that in Europe, they weren't using so many antibiotics for ear infections. I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. Stop using antibiotics. What else can I use? So I started studying herbal medicine and looking for some alternatives and natural approaches to treating common pediatric illnesses. And that was in the early 90s. And as you were just saying, Elisa, people were much more open-minded then. It was I think it was the third Whole Foods in the country had opened in Mill Valley, where my practice was. Parents were going there, buying echinacea, and they were like, can I use this on my kid? And I was like, I don't know. So I decided I wanted to learn, what could I use that would boost the immune system naturally treat bacterial infections, viral infections. And so I just started studying herbal medicine, and then homeopathy, and just the whole range of what we called then alternative medicine, and looking at what I could pull into my bag of therapeutics. So I didn't have to use antibiotics. I didn't have to use steroids. And that was kind of where I started. And really, our approach still at Pediatric Alternatives is to be a primary care pediatric practice and start out kids with, healthy diets, moms who breastfeed, not not using antibiotics unless we absolutely have to, keeping kids away from toxins. And and we have a lot more chronic kids showing up, though. And so now we're having to get into the business of functional medicine and all the testing and dealing with how to help our kids who have autism and who are on the spectrum. So it is a completely different landscape than when I started. And I feel like the medicine has gotten politicized now and polarized. And whereas in the past, I could talk about vaccines. Nobody cared what I did. If I did an alternative schedule, it wasn't a big deal. I could say anything I wanted. I could have my medical opinion. And now it's become politicized, and, you say certain things. And especially in California, we have had a lot of restrictions and limitations put on how we can practice. And it's become political, as opposed to something that used to be just a completely medical decision, as a doctor, between the doctor and the patient has really changed. So that's kind of how it's evolved in my world.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. So I'm just going to say that I'm going to now we can get into some of your thoughts and get into the conversation on the state of our children's health. You guys know I've written about that. I've been frankly horrified. You know, I'm a little bit outspoken about this topic. I don't shy away from it. And you know, I have to say that since I started in the integrated, I've been practicing 43 years. And since I've started the integrated space, which is really only for 32 years more doing integrative, that I kept on having to evolve to increase my toolbox. That what was working before, just a simple constitutional homeopathic, just some simple herbs were not working, that our kids were getting progressively sicker, and I had to expand. And I got deep into Lyme, and I got into deep in various therapeutics to manage every kind of chronic infection known to man, and we can get into that. So I'll give you one little brief story, and then I want to hear all your views about your thoughts on the state of our children's health. And what do you see are the most looming challenges our kids are facing now from your very personal perspectives? And feel free, this is a non-censored platform. I remember briefly, Station and I were working urgent care. We overlapped many years ago. And I had prescribed arnica, a homeopathic for a sprained ankle. And the pediatrician whose kid it was complained to my boss. And my boss said, Michelle, you cannot use arnica. And arnica is one of the crossover homeopathics that made it into mainstream. Plenty of surgical placebo controlled double-blinded studies in PubMed on arnica. And my boss said, no, you can't use it here. It is verboten. And I said, that's an ultimatum. And he said, yes. And I said, fine, I quit. And I opened my own integrative urgent care. That's just what I did. So now you can get a sense of who I am. But let's turn that question to you on your thoughts about the state of our kids' health. What are the challenges? Personal, professionally, as a mom, what are you seeing? What are you dealing with? And what are your thoughts on this? Because it weighs on my soul. So I'm just going to open it up.
I love that.
Michelle, I think we appreciate how feisty you are, that you would take that ultimatum, and it would be such a motivator for you. The present state of our children is extremely worrisome. So the thing that I've sort of concentrated on is the whole neurodevelopmental thing. You mentioned the 1 in 12.5 boys in California with autism. You know, if you look at across the state, the latest numbers, which you have to remember, are based on a 2014 birth cohort. So the number of 1 in 31 that Secretary Kennedy announced a few weeks ago, it's clearly worse than that now. It takes the child, they don't count till the child gets to be 8. And then for some reason, it takes the CDC 4 years to do their work. So we're looking at old data. It is worse now. But we're seeing so much more allergy and autoimmunity, this shift from good Th1 and cellular immunity to more tendencies to allergy and autoimmunity, which includes childhood diabetes. But we're also seeing so-called adult onset diabetes in kids now. 8, 9, 10-year-olds are being diagnosed with what used to be called adult onset diabetes. Now it's called type 2. The other thing that really worries me, in my state of Virginia, 30% of kids are overweight or obese. And that leads to a chronic state of inflammation. So it's going to make all their other problems, even worse. So I think it's a huge challenge. I don't think this challenge can be met in our current insurance model. And I do have some hope that Secretary Kennedy is really working hard to turn the focus on to chronic childhood illnesses. And that's something that we've not had in the prior NIH budgeting. So I'll open it up to my colleagues to add on to that tale of woe.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to add that, when we talk about these numbers, they are staggering alone, just the numbers, but these are numbers of disease. And when you're in integrative and functional medicine, you understand and appreciate that the disease and the diagnosis of a disease is the tip of the iceberg. And that for every one child with autism, there's probably, and I don't even know a number, so I won't throw one out there, but exponentially more children with neuroinflammation, and that same process that just hasn't actually peaked into the disease category. And I think that's true of all of these chronic diseases. And And I think that's also something that as parents, people don't really understand that. And it is for us, I think, a big part of our job and our role to actually identify when the situations haven't made the disease state yet and really divert at that point, but also educate on on that in the children.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's one alarming study that looked at, just for the listeners, there's a very general, non-specific autoimmune blood marker called an ANA, anti-nuclear antibody. It does not mean you have any particular autoimmune disease, but it's kind of like the canary in the coal mine. It's a sign that your immune system is unhappy. And so this one study took different age groups and looked at positive ANA rates in those age groups through various time periods, and found that and this was starting in the late 70s, early 80s, okay, in the 1980s, and found that every age group had increasing rates of positive ANA levels. However, the age group with the fastest rise in positive ANA rates were our teenagers, 12 to 18 years of age. And from the 80s to the 90s, the rates doubled from baseline, and then again tripled into the 90s, right? And that, when I am checking ANA levels now on my preteens and tweens, because I want to know, this is not to scare families, but to say, look, this is an amazing opportunity to show before you have a clinical disease. We know your immune system's unhappy. Let's do everything we can to reverse this process. And one of the things, for me, it sounds simple, right? But some of the simplest things are not the easiest things to do, yet they make the most profound changes. And the reason I wrote my book was really to educate parents and practitioners on the power of optimizing gut microbiome health for prevention and true, really true precision medicine. And I'll give you an example of this one kiddo. I mean, it's when we look at mental health, and for me, with a teenage daughter, I'm really, really focused on mental health concerns, because we know, 1 in 4 teenage girls, or 1 in 3 teenage girls today, has seriously thought of suicide. And, with my 15-and-a-half-year-old, I'm watching to make sure that doesn't become one of those statistics, right? But we know that brain health starts in the gut. And I saw this one little girl, 10-year-old, who had a whole list of acronyms, right? OCD, ADD, ODD, PTSD, anxiety. And she tried 10 years of age, multiple medications, and had failed them all, either because they didn't work or because too many side effects. And so mom came to me, and, we did some blood workup, and we did a microbiome analysis. And I'm going to, just full disclosure, I'm the chief medical officer for Tiny Health, which is a microbiome testing company, but it uses a different way of looking at the microbiome. So we could look at her function and see, wow, she has something called metabolic endotoxemia. She has too many of these gram-negative bacteria. She has a high or very nil GABA production capacity in her gut. And just by knowing exactly what to target, I mean, she'd been suffering for years, right? Within 2 months, the mom wrote back and said, she's a different kid. Like, thank you for giving me my daughter back. And that was all by working on her gut. And we know that our gut microbiomes have changed. Dr. Sabine Hazan, through the pandemic, found that adults with worse COVID outcomes had lower bifidobacteria. And we're finding, babies should have up to 80% of their microbiome be completely bifidobacteria. Many babies have none. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing so many babies losing their immune tolerance and developing these anaphylactic food allergies. I mean, you guys ever remember in residency writing a prescription for an EpiPen? And now, like, 1 in 12 to 1 in 13 kids has anaphylactic food allergies. So something has shifted, and it's not our genes, but the way our microbiome is interacting with our genes and all of these environmental toxins that we're faced with, that's really shifting what's going on with our kids and our adults, right? Because I know I certainly have lots of parents who never had a food allergy in life, and now all of a sudden they're anaphylactic to 5 different foods, right? So things are changing, but we always have to lead with, I think as pediatricians, we're really good at leading with hope, right? Because we don't want to be all doom and gloom. I mean, there are actionable steps that we can take. And I mean, that's why you and I wouldn't be doing this if there weren't some things that we could actually do. And I think that, I mean, the tides are changing. So let's, fingers crossed that we can keep the momentum going.
No, we can definitely focus on this. I'm so glad you brought that up, Elisa, these different points. We had Dr. Sabine on last month, and we talked specifically about the microbiome and mental health challenges in children. That was our show, because I too know that as I support this gut-brain microbiome axis that we're all focused on. And there have been several hits that have happened in the past 25 years. It's been incrementally increasing. One is a change in our food supply, GMOs and their associated pesticides, glyphosate, and how do you say glyphosate? Then the EMF explosion, this 5G landscape. There are some cities that are just peppered with 5G towers. It's shocking. And last but not least, you mentioned the COVID study that Dr. Sabine Hazan did. She gave that COVID vaccine. She only had an N of 4. That's a small study, but all 4 of her subjects pre and post study after they got the COVID vaccine wiped out their bifidobacteria. No bifido, no short chain fatty acids, no neurotransmitter production. No, those short chain fatty acids cross the blood-brain barrier, and our kids are struggling. So we have the spikeopathy landscape to deal with that as well if it's a COVID vaccine or the COVID illness or all of it, or any other gain of function organism that we want to delve into, gain that has literally clouded the health of our children, making it very challenging for even people like us who are aware, curious, learning every second. We're constantly delving in to try and unravel these layers that keep hitting our kids. Stacia, do you want to weigh in?
Why don't you ask me your question again, Michelle? Because we've gone around.
Because I've been on the soapbox. Now I'm getting on my rant platform. Let me derant myself.
What question should I respond to?
I was just your thoughts on the state of our children's health.
Oh, okay. Right.
What do you see are, for you in your practice over many decades, the most prescient problems that are affecting our kids now?
Wow. Well, you guys really covered a lot of it. Obviously, we all know that, there's an epidemic of chronic illness, right? And I think one thing is that parents don't have a normal baseline for kids anymore. That's what I'm seeing in a lot of young families, is all the kids in the preschool, all the kids in the grade school, all the kids in the middle school, they all have problems, and it's been normalized. And so a lot of parents think, okay, well, it's just normal for my child to have ADHD and to be on medicine and to have type 1 diabetes at the same time, and I'm so grateful for Bobby Kennedy for bringing the conversation a little more into the public and raising awareness that this is not normal. This is not the way kids are supposed to be. Kids, not that long ago, were pretty healthy. I mean, within my lifetime as a pediatrician, right? In one generation, it's changed dramatically, and we need that awareness. We need people to have that awareness. I just want to acknowledge him for his bravery, for speaking out against in the face of all the criticism and slander, to actually speak for our children, because I think that public awareness about the state of children's health is really important. So that's what I would.
Thank you for touching on the politicization. I know so many of us today have already mentioned the politicization of medicine, where we're now, I mean, who would have thought that we as pediatricians would be talking about politics, advocacy, political work, petitions, I never thought I'd be doing that. Legal forays, going to DC, meeting with the FDA. Who would have thought we'd be doing that? I've done research, never thought I'd be doing research on various infant formula, for example. So we've had to really step out of our comfort zones and do things that we didn't know we'd be doing, things that we're not necessarily trained to do, but somehow we felt compelled because of our love of children and families to do this work. I want to pivot again a little bit here to get into some positive thinking on a lysosome, because I don't want to be Dr. Doom and Gloom either. I also like the big Broadway moment, happy ending in Hollywood. But if we have the magic wand, and I do have a magic wand, by the way, I used to bring it to the office all the time, is which tool, if you could, any of the tools you've learned to share with your families that you would bring forward to say, this is something that we can offer families here and now, as solutions-based, so parents don't leave this podcast depressed as heck, what do we offer? What do you offer to your families to say, outside of the usual, that embrace this and we can kind of regain the terrain, as I tell families, of our children's health? Any ideas of what you would like, what wand waving tool you like to use?
I mean, I would say if I could wave my wand and have everyone, follow a gut microbiome nourishing diet and lifestyle, that would be amazing, right? Because that automatically eliminates toxins and eliminates ultra processed foods and focuses on a lifestyle with optimal sleep and optimal vagus nerve functioning. Now that would be the ideal, right? And that's what, I teach kids and families. You make it fun, right? You talk about creating microbiome magic, and we learn how to live like gut heroes. So they'll get there. And I do, over the years now, I've a big cohort who are in college or have graduated from college. And I know it comes back even in the teenage years. If they start pushing back and they're butting heads, you plant the seeds, you keep it going, you show that you live this way. And then they come back and they say, Dr. Song, can we talk about, I know something's going on with my gut. What kind of things should I be focused on eating? And it comes back, right? But apart from that, because that's not an overnight fix, it's something that we're constantly working on and has to be the foundation. But I would say the two things that I will want every family to have to try to optimize what's going on right now is a tiny health stool test and a way to work on your vagus nerve every day, whether that's and they can be free things, right? The tiny health test, it's actually direct to consumer, the baseline test that anyone can order. But the vagus nerve tools, you could practice EFT tapping, having a gratitude journal, walking in nature, learning how to breathe with your belly. All of these things, because just as our kids and our adult microbiomes have changed, our vagus nerve functioning has changed too. A lot of people, wear I have an Aura ring, right? We track our heart rate variability. Some people do that with their Apple Watch or their Whoop band or whatever it is. But we can see over the decades too, there's a cardiologist in Germany that found that children's baseline heart rate variabilities have also declined, over the decades. And heart rate variability is one of the best predictors of current and future health. So, I tell my kids, look, the two things I want, not my own kids, but yes, my own kids, but the patients, the two things that I will feel like, that I have set you up for success, as you head off to college or whatever's beyond high school, is if you can learn how to read a food label and choose packaged foods in a savvy way, and B, if you can learn how to regulate your nervous system. I feel like, just with those two things, so many other things will fall into place.
Well, thank you for that wisdom, Elisa. That was profound, and I couldn't agree more. Having kids regulate their parasympathetic tone. I might have to take a couple lessons myself. I might have to check in Dr. Song's clinic, learn a few techniques. I think I'm in sympathetic overdrive. Okay, anybody else want to chime in? Those are good.
Well, I always like to start with the gut, so I'm so glad that that was the focus. But the other thing I really want for this generation of children is I want them to be out in nature. I want them to be walking barefoot on wet grass or wet sand. And I want them not to spend their lives gaming and playing video games and looking at screens. I think that the recommendation to not have any screen time for kids for the first 2 years is really, really important because the constant changing of video images wires kids' brains to expect so much stimulation, and it changes the way that their neurodevelopmental progress is made. So I want kids out in nature. I want them off screens, and that plus eating whole foods and taking care of their gut microbiome, I think is going to go a long way to reversing some of these illnesses.
Perfect segue. Gut, gut, gut. That's what I'm hearing. Gut, gut, gut. Please, let's continue.
Well, I would just third that, right? But I think that what we're saying is some of it is just back to basics from the beginning, which is a healthy diet, nutrition from the beginning, kids playing outside like they used to, not inside, in front of the screen, and going back to sort of simpler ways for when children are young. In my practice, that's really what we focus on in the beginning is all these basics. And I remember when I first started my practice, that's what I felt like I was promoting is just, children need to have just a sort of a simple life. I think one thing maybe it was mentioned is going to bed on time. Good food, playing outside, getting enough sleep, going to bed when it gets dark. We're learning more and more about how light affects our health and our biorhythms, and we're not really meant to stay up late in artificial light. And so I think that's also a really just important basic to remind parents.
Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everyone, and those are all on my top tier list. I think I would just second that having our children feel connected is really important, and connection to people, connection to nature, connection to maybe a broader view or a spiritual practice, like bringing our children's regulating the nervous systems through supporting the nervous system through connection. I would also say EMF. I mean, the smart homes, the smart devices, all of these in the home, the way that impacts the microbiome, as we talk about how important the microbiome is, but we realize the microbiome makes so much more toxicity, and it affects our microbiome, the electromagnetic fields, in a way that then affects our health. So I really like my families and my patients to become aware of that and be mindful of turning off all the devices, hardwiring the house, so that that we have a stronger foundation to start with. That the body is not being zapped with these intermittent EMF fields throughout the day.
And if anyone is unaware, to go look at Environmental Health Trust, just so much data on that website, and Dr. Deborah Davis. And I would chime in, these are all great points, ladies, is of course, my biggest peeve now is social media. I think kids need to be off social media. I think every parent needs to behooves every parent within their community to talk to each other and say, let's get our kids off of TikTok and Insta. I mean, they're so young. All you see is little kids scrolling. What the heck are they scrolling for? And I feel the same thing. Those images and subliminal messaging that's coming through social media is very dangerous to developing brains and dopamine release and kind of creating addictions. We know dopamine is related to addiction. So before we wrap up with final points, I do want to get to you, Liz, because today is a special day and it's the release of your book today. Can you just give us a little bit about your newest release, and congratulations. We know how hard it is.
Thank you so much. Well, in the beginning of COVID, I just thought that the mRNA shots were such a bad idea on so many different levels. And I was shocked at how easily they were promoted to children down to the age of 6 months. I listened to a bunch of the American Committee for Immunization Practices meetings where they discussed this idea, and I was shocked that they went ahead and approved them because very early on in June of 2021, they already knew that myocarditis was showing up about 12 times more commonly in the kids that had gotten the shots. So I spent a couple of years researching it and writing a book, and I tried to make it technical enough that parents could understand that there's a whole lot of science here, but I tried to use a lot of analogies so that it would be easy to understand. And I close each chapter by asking the parents questions. Now that you know this information, would it have changed your mind about what you decided to do? I think it's really important for parents to realize that they were manipulated and there was a lot of propaganda during COVID. And I think that parents need to take back their power and realize that they're the ones that can make informed consent decisions for their children. And you may remember that during COVID, informed consent essentially didn't exist because the package insert for the vaccine was literally blank. And so, what we could usually do to tell people what was in the shot, what the side effects were, they just had this theater where they folded up big piece of paper the way that it would have been had it had any information and stuck it in the box. So, I don't want anything like COVID to happen again. So, my real goal with this book is people to understand how this can never, ever, ever happen again. It was so costly to kids in terms of their mental health and their educational development. And we, as the adults in the room, cannot let that happen again.
Bravo for that. I couldn't concur more than that. Dr. Senef and I, she is my colleague. We did write to that ACIP committee in June of 2021, an article that I wrote up called Pedicide, and I was pretty shocked about the myocarditis, especially in boys and our teens, adolescents, athletes, individuals in the military. It's been nothing short of shocking. So thank you for your work in that book. Any final comments from any of you to our listeners, or gems or pearls, or just things that you want to share from your purchase as moms? Because I know you're all moms, and I love that we're all moms. And oh boy, talk about a hard journey that is. But yeah, any final words for listeners, and then we'll let you all go back to your busy days.
I'll speak to the moms for a minute. I think it's really important to reinforce to all of you moms out there to trust your intuition about your kids. You know your kids best, and a lot of doctors don't trust what mothers have to say about their kids, and you come in and you tell them about something that you think is going on, it's dismissed. But trust your intuition and find somebody who will listen to you. And just you are the advocate for your child.
Right. You know your child best. Okay. Nicole?
Well, I just wanted to say that having 3 teenagers, and I am living that difficulty with our world around us, and how do we swim upstream when the current is so strong. And I just want to say to the moms that you're not alone. I also want to recognize that this is not easy. I think probably when we were children, there were different issues, but our parents didn't have to read every label at the grocery store. And, we didn't have to battle with this addiction to technology screens every day. And the social environment that our children is in is a very different landscape. And I think that we are all very aware of that, and there are good changes coming in terms of that increased awareness and consciousness around these issues. So stay the course, stay strong, continuing to reach for improvements, but also be easy, because we cannot be perfect.
Thank you for that. Elisa, moms, comments?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I will speak from just personal experience too. We have to do our best as moms to not give in to the mom guilt, right? Because I know, there are many things that we will learn along the way where we cringe and wish we had known when our kids were younger. And I do the same thing. Even I was actually already a practicing integrative pediatrician, and there are still things I go back and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that when I was pregnant with Kenzie, right? And so, what we just want to do is understand that what's happened in the past is just a part of your child's story. It's just a part of telling how they got to where they are now. And then from this point on, you have that knowledge so you can rewrite their story and really move forward in a different direction than had you not known. Right. So that it's so important because I think that we moms are just kind of hardwired to feel guilty about everything. And so, just really, sitting, acknowledging that feeling and then moving on is the best thing we can do.
Thank you for that. Liz, any final thoughts on that?
Well, I just think there's lots of room for parental choice. There's some things that are absolutes. Like if your child has celiac disease, you really shouldn't allow them to have any gluten because it's going to inflame their gut. But, does it really matter if you start peas or carrots first? No. And I'm cringe to think that when I was a young pediatrician, I was taught to tell people to get rice cereal out of a box. And that was the first food you gave. And then I moved on to saying avocado plus 3 more vegetables before they ever taste anything that's sweet. But I want, if I were queen, I'd love to have medicine move from an authoritarian, the doctor tells you what to do, to a collaborative model where we get to know the families and we see what the parental preferences are and we support our moms as long as the preferences are appropriate. Moms are under so much pressure now because they see so many things on the web that it makes them feel very inadequate. And I want to circle back around to the fact that they know more than they think they do. Maternal instinct is quite well honed over millennia to help you take care of your child. So rely on your instincts. Don't be bullied by people in the medical profession that just want to tell you what to do, and stand up for yourself and your child.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you to all of you. I could just listen to all of you all day because I learned so much. Yeah, I'm hosting this show, but gosh, I'm like picking up tips all the time. And I would just finally end by saying my favorite expression is it's a marathon, not a sprint. There is no such thing as a perfection. That's a construct in your mind. And we do the best we can. Children model our behavior. I was buying organic. My husband was hiding ho-hos in his closet. Parents, try to unite. Even if you differ, which you likely will, stay united in front of your kids, because if you don't, by 2 years old, they know how to split you. They're really good at it. So stay united, try to work it out prior to talking to your kids, acknowledge how they feel. And thank you everybody for attending today. And thank you for all your gals and what you bring to the table. I am really honored today. So
thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
My
It was
pleasure.
so fun.
oh, please, nonprofit, 501c3, I always forget to say this, sign up to the newsletter, donate to our organization, and we do this on a shoestring budget. We appreciate your support. Thank you very much. And thanks to our producer, Ann Temple, for reminding me to talk about that because I never remember. So thanks again.